training. This is Samuel Burbano, and today we're covering whether time and area restrictions were unreasonable under Ohio state law. Keep in mind that when we did that search from the jurisdictional search bar, we saw some cases. We worked on those the other day. We saw why the language of the West editors and the headnotes can be connected to the search terms that we ran. We also noticed the key numbers. Again, review from last time. Something like this that talks exactly about your issue is one way to be connected to helpful cases. But today we focused on secondary sources. You'll see something here in Ohio Jur that talks specifically about geographic and time limitations, something very important to the issue that you're working on. But not all searches are perfect, and sometimes you may have to view all of these results and do some filtering. Let's do that right now. From here, you'll notice that this line allows you to adjust by level of detail. Right now I have it on the lowest so that I can show you some of the stuff that's out here. Some of it, as you can see, is in Ohio Jur. Some of it is in the ALR, which we talked about last time as a collection of cases that talk about a specifically narrow issue, like territorial extent of restrictions. So all of these things interpreting questions of the territory that a reasonable non-compete can or sometimes can't talk about. You'll see some of these other things from a fellow named Williston, who wrote a very important book about contracts, another ALR, and the like. You can always filter and narrow using some of these options over here. Within Ohio Jur, we talked about why this might be helpful once we're starting our research, because it's always helpful to start in secondary sources. We will see that Ohio Jur is highlighted here, so that any source that we're looking at will know what it is in this title bar. Within a secondary source, you'll see links to all the helpful things like the key numbers on Westlaw, the ALR that we talked about earlier, other treatises and practice aids on the topic, and even trial strategy. More on that in a second. But the real value in a secondary source is what you're looking at here with footnote 8. Things like black letter rules of law. 5 years has been found valid in some cases. And which case is that? Tomlin here in the footnotes. So all of these propositions of law that have these numbers link you out to helpful cases, statutes, and authority that supports the propositions that have been put forth in Ohio Jur. Let's take another look here, an illustration. So these illustrations explain specific other things that happened in certain cases, like this Harry Livingston thing here. Not unreasonable as to space when the covenant said 25 miles. Interesting. But probably there's something more interesting and more recent than this 1941 case. Keep in mind that anything that you pull up on Westlaw that has these headnotes will also have these key numbers, and clicking on that very specific level will allow you to update your research so that you're not just running with the law and cases from the 40s, but maybe there's something more recent that might be a little bit more illuminating because the factors might be updated. You can see that doing that in the jurisdiction of Ohio, again, I just clicked on that lowest level of detail, brings you to stuff that's way more recent, and again, might help you as you're refining what the outer limits are of this rule and where your case falls in that continuum. Here's another example of how a secondary source connects you to a statute. You'll see here that this section of Ohio practice is talking about non-compete and citing this section of the revised code. We'll click on it here together. What you can do from here, a number of things across the top, and I'll go through those individually. The first is graphical statute. So when we've hit history and graphical statute, you see what the statute actually looked like at a specific date and time. You'll notice here, the law's been pretty same the whole time, but it would change colors to indicate when the law was a different text. And you'll need to consult the law at a particular date and time to determine, hey, what were the facts at that time that gave rise to my cause of action, and what was the law that actually supported it? Note to decisions, the second tab over here, connects you to a huge bunch of common law decisions that interpret specific issues within the statute. And last, secondary sources. Again, another handy way to go from the text of a law to sources that can help you get kind of the general overview of it. Within those secondary sources, just because there are so many of them, you can narrow by publication name. See how it says select the publication name? I've typed in Ohio and then just clicked on a couple things in Ohio. And of course, that would take me back into the section that we started with to even get to this statute in the first place. Seeing how all these things are connected. The secondary source takes you to cases and statutes, and in those cases and statutes are secondary sources that are just like it. So once you start seeing the same thing over and over again, you're probably in business. You're probably getting to the right spot in your research. Within a source, remember to use those table of contents, because you can see here, every different appellate district might have different authority on point for a particular issue, like soliciting former customers. Lastly, a couple other cool ways to get to the answer on your issue. One is the Amjur proof of facts, where you can see things like questions, answers, the real-life context of these non-compete questions. Another way is with the civil jury instructions. I know you were working with a problem in Massachusetts last week, so what I did was click into Massachusetts. You'll see that there is a jury instruction that comes up. You see those yellow texts about social hosts. And clicking on it actually shows you what they recommend that a judge say to lay people, so that lay people can actually understand the law without going to law school, so that they can decide a case. You can see, again, like any secondary source, footnotes that connect you to authority, whether statutes or other cases, that support these statements that a judge would instruct the jury under. This concludes a brief walkthrough of everything that we covered today in class. If you have more questions, please dial the reference attorneys at any time of the day or night at 1-800-REF-ATTY. Thanks for listening.